And in order to achieve the goal of the Bodhisattva, which is Buddhahood, then it's necessary to amass the two collections, the collection of merit and the collection of wisdom. And that's because the collection of merit is what results in the form body of the Buddha. And the form body of the Buddha is like the Nirmanakaya, or the emanation body. Shakyamuni Buddha is an example of an emanation body. And also the Sambhogakaya, or the enjoyment body. And that's a body that a Buddha has that can only be perceived by very high bodhisattvas, or the Arya bodhisattvas. And the two form bodies of a Buddha is what enables the Buddha to fulfill his purpose of benefiting sentient beings, because then he can manifest in various forms and communicate to them, teach them the Dharma. So that's the result of the accumulation of merit. And then the second accumulation is the accumulation of wisdom. And the accumulation of wisdom results in the mind of a Buddha. So this is a fully omniscient mind, which is able to perceive both the ultimate truth and customary truths simultaneously. So all aspects of all things, both on the ultimate level and the conventional level, like that. And that fulfills the self-purpose of the Buddha, which is to achieve happiness. So, and of course, by having that omniscient mind, then the Buddha can benefit other beings too. So it's not like black and white, one or the other. So in order to achieve the two collections, the collection of merit and the collection of wisdom, the Bodhisattva engages in the 6 perfections. And that's the perfection of generosity, morality, patience, effort, meditation, and wisdom. So the practice of generosity is the practice of giving without requiring anything in return. And this perfection was mentioned first because it's the way in which one can initially attract living beings to be able to ultimately give them teachings, by giving them material wealth or loving kindness or advice or protection, like that. And then the perfection of morality. This is the practice of not hurting living beings and protecting them, helping them in various ways as they need. And then the practice of patience, which is tolerating the difficulties on the path without getting upset, without getting angry. And effort, the practice of effort is the practice of enthusiasm, delighting in the practice of virtue. And then the practice of meditation is single-pointed concentration. And the practice of wisdom has both a ultimate wisdom and conventional wisdom. The conventional wisdom is various skills and arts and crafts skills, knowledge of medicine, things like this. And then the ultimate wisdom is the view that directly perceives the ultimate reality of things. And these 6 perfections are called perfections, or transcendencies, because they're all practiced with the ultimate wisdom. So, like for example, when one is practicing generosity, there's generally, one conceives of 3 things that are taking place, or there's 3 factors involved in the practice of generosity. there's oneself as the giver, there's somebody else as the receiver, and then there's an object, the gift, that is provided to the receiver by the giver. And when those three things are combined, you have an act of generosity, an act of giving. So when one combines the ultimate wisdom with the practice of generosity, one understands that each of these factors or identities, the identity of someone being a giver, the identity of someone being a receiver, and the identity of something as being a gift, all of these exist as mere relativities. There's no giver without a receiver. There's no receiver without a giver. There's no gift without a giver, like that. So that each of these identities does not come from the side of the object, but rather it's something that is created conceptually, and then it's imputed on these various objects. And it's like, for example, these blankets that one is wearing or using. When you look at the blanket, then the shape and color appears to your eyes, right? But the identity of those objects as being blankets does not appear to your mind like the way the color and shape appears to your visual consciousness. Like even a child that doesn't know the language of, say, English, can see the color and shape, but they don't know the term blanket. So that's something that's created conceptually. And then when one has the concept of blanket, one imputes it on this particular shape and color. So like that, these identities of the giver, the receiver, and the gift, those are created conceptually, and then they're imputed on the respective person and the thing that's being moved from one person to the other. So by understanding that, then the act of generosity does not create the cause of uncontrolled rebirth, because one is not grasping at a personal identity within oneself, one is not grasping a personal identity of the other, one is not grasping an identity of the thing that's being given, and so one is not creating the causes for taking rebirth. Further, one is creating the cause so that when one has achieved the direct realization of ultimate reality, then one can still engage in such practices of generosity without having to have the habitual thoughts governing the practice. Right now, we act to a great extent out of our habits of actions from what we've done in the past. And, we identify with, sometimes there's like through empathy, then there could be just an automatic instinctual wish to give something to benefit somebody who is without, and that caused this experience of empathy to arise. And then that gets transformed into concepts, and one starts thinking, what shall I give this person? Wouldn't it be nice to give this person something? And then these thoughts can keep going, I wonder, do I have anything that this person needs? And will this person use it appropriately? I mean, if it's a person on the street, if it's a homeless person, one might start thinking, well, if I give them money, maybe they're suffering from alcoholism, and then they'll just use it to buy alcohol, and blah, blah, blah. There's all these thoughts going on in one's mind. Right? And then these thoughts combine to determine whether or not one is going to act on this, this initial instinct to give or not. So once you realize the ultimate reality of things, all those thoughts don't arise, at least not in the same way. There's some habits, but one is not controlled by them at all. So then one wonders, well, maybe one wouldn't even involve oneself in the practice of generosity because there's no real you, there's no real other, there's no real things. So why do anything? And so that's one of the reasons why the answer to that question is to benefit living beings, one has to do something for them, if one has the capability. So regardless of whether they have an illusory appearance or whether oneself has an illusory appearance, there's still some need here that one can address. And when one is engaging in the practice of generosity combined with wisdom, then one is already establishing these instincts in one's mind to be able to practice generosity even when one's mind is entered into this transcendent view of all things, which is free from the habits of ignorance. And the same thing with morality and patience, effort, and so on. So it's very important to cultivate the practice of wisdom, or cultivate wisdom, especially ultimate wisdom. And furthermore, the ultimate wisdom is the actual antidote to the whole of samsara. And samsara is the Sanskrit word that means the uncontrolled death and rebirth, this cycle of uncontrolled death and rebirth. And the root cause of the uncontrolled rebirth is an ignorant view that views things as if they existed in their own right, as if these identities were not a creation of thought and imputed, but rather existing from the side of the object and appearing through its own force to one's mind. So that ignorance is what causes the whole vicious circle of death and rebirth to exist. And the ultimate wisdom is the direct antidote to that. Because where that ignorance is seen an inherently existing self, the wisdom sees an absence of an inherently existing self. And thus the two contradict each other. They can't abide together in the same moment because they contradict each other. Just like when you have hot water, if you put cold water in it, the temperature goes down. So when you have that ignorance, when you generate wisdom, the ignorance gets weaker and weaker. Also, that ignorance doesn't have any support in valid reasoning. It's just a habit. And there's two ways in which this ignorance appears. One is as kind of an unconscious belief that things inherently exist. And then the other is a conscious belief that things inherently exist that's based upon studying philosophy. And the conscious belief that things inherently exist through the study of philosophy, that's not the root cause of cyclic existence, because then in order to get free from cyclic existence, you would just have to avoid the study of those types of philosophy. And that's not the case. So that's not the root ignorance, but a lot of times when we study texts that are dealing with the cultivation of this ultimate wisdom, it's you're studying the different views of other scholars, non-Buddhist scholars who are supporting the view of an inherently existing self, and then a Buddhist scholar will be refuting that view. And it's not directly generating the wisdom, the correct wisdom that will be the antidote to the unconscious ignorance, but it will get you there. That's why they study it. It will get you there. Because if things did inherently exist the way the unconscious ignorance views them, no, wait a second. If things inherently exist, if the things inherently existed the way these non-Buddhist scholars viewed them to exist, then they would have to exist in the way the unconscious ignorance views them. And so when one realizes that they don't exist the way the non-Buddhist scholars assert, then one begins to understand that the things don't exist at all according to even one's own inclinations, unconscious inclinations. So that's why it's worth studying some of these texts, even though those texts might be quite scholarly in their themes. But it's not necessary to study these scholarly texts in order to gain the correct understanding. If you have a good teacher who has the correct understanding, then they can teach you how to develop it in all kinds of ways, through various examples and some reasoning, and put you in different positions, which can gradually lead you to the right view. I'm thinking about this one great master called Naropa, and his teacher was Tilopa. And Naropa was a former abbot of the great Nalanda monastery of ancient India. And he realized at some point that he didn't really have the experience that he needed, that he had all of this intellectual understanding that he could defeat anybody in debate. And that was one of the jobs of an abbot of Nalanda monastery, because you would have scholars of non-Buddhist monasteries who would come, whether they were monasteries or whatever, but you would have non-Buddhist scholars who would come and challenge the Buddhist scholars to public debate, and the Buddhist scholars did not want to lose those debates, and so they would have to have a very good scholar to respond to, so you would have these challenges. And so Naropa was very successful as a debater. But you can be a very good debater, but not have a very profound experience, because debating is its own skill. So he discovered that his experience was lacking, and he went looking for a master who could lead him to the right level of view. And he was led different ways, and he finally found Tilopa. And he spent 12 years studying with Tilopa, and Tilopa set him on a number of very difficult tasks. If you remember your Greek mythology and the labors of Hercules, the labors of Naropa were horrendous, very difficult things. And I think that the master Marpa, the Tibetan translator, the great translator Marpa, studied directly with Naropa. And, so he benefited from the study with Naropa, but he also learned Naropa's story and everything. And Marpa decided that, Marpa had this one student, Milarepa, and Milarepa practiced black magic and had killed over 30 people, and so Marpa had to try to get Milarepa to purify all of that negative karma, because that would be an obstacle for him to generate any kind of realizations of the path. So he also subjected Milarepa to some very difficult tasks to overcome that negative karma. But in the end, I think, and he succeeded, but he thought that for future generations, he said, let's not provide such difficult tasks the way Tilopa did to Naropa and the way I did to Milarepa. Let's try to find something less strenuous for the benefit of these disciples. So one of the last things that Tilopa did to shake Naropa out of his ordinary view was, this is after 12 years, very difficult hardships and so on. He says, okay, now's the time I'm going to give you the initiation. And in those days, the initiation was, you knew you were initiated. It wasn't just words, it wasn't, I've been initiated now. Whoa, how do you know you're initiated? Well, I was sitting in the room. The real initiation is a change that takes place in your mind. And then you can just meditate on that new experience. And that experience then grows. But to receive that kind of initiation, you have to be well prepared. Your mind has to be able to have this communication from the guru that it brings about such a change in one's mind. So Tilopa said to Naropa, okay, I'm going to give the initiation. And they were in some desolate place. And Tilopa says, okay, now the ritual begins by you offering me a mandala. And Naropa says, I don't have a mandala. And he says, make it out of mud. And Naropa said, I don't have any water with me. He says, is your bladder full? Use your pee to make a mud pie and offer me that as the mandala. And so he offered it, and with visualization of the wonderful world, universal mandala and everything, jewels, everything like that. And Tilopa accepted it, and this with the appropriate kind of solemnity of this, and he took the mandala and then threw it in the face of Naropa. And it sent Naropa into a deep state of concentration, which he stayed in for a week. When he came out of it, Tilopa was not there. He was on his own, and he was in this other world. He really had changed. So there's different ways of leading the disciple, and the study of some of these great philosophical texts, like the texts of Nagarjuna and his main disciple Aryadeva, of the other great Madhyamika scholars like Chandrakirti, and those from India, and the great Tibetan scholars like Lama Tsongkhapa. One can study their text and gain gradually an understanding that way. But at the same time, it's important to engage in purification and the accumulation of merit in order to make one's mind ready and able to understand and make a switch from a very habituated way of seeing things into a new way of seeing things. Now, there is a very simple meditation practice. That is, it's simple to say, not so simple to do, but very simple to describe. And it's just it's a way of meditating on the ultimate level of reality, that has only 4 steps. And the first step is to identify the wrong view that we have. We have to identify the wrong view. And usually this practice is done initially with oneself, one's personal identity. And then after you become familiar with it and get a sense of what the emptiness of the self is, personal self, then you move to other objects. So generally, the subject of emptiness, or emptiness is another word for ultimate reality. It's not the way the word empty, the way the word is used in English romantic literature. I'm feeling empty and depressed. No, it's just that it's empty. The word is used like if you come home or you come to some place where you've been invited and you're feeling hungry, and on the kitchen table there's a pizza box. You think, oh, just what I need, a slice of pizza. And then you open the box and there's nothing in it. Ah, it's empty. So similarly, the way we view ourselves is having a level of reality that it doesn't possess. And then when you subject it to an appropriate analysis, you discover that yourself is empty of that level of reality that it never possessed to begin with. But it appears that way. There's like a hallucination. So that's why the word emptiness is used. And the Sanskrit word is shunyata. So one has to, so there's emptiness can be divided in many different ways, but there's 2 fundamental divisions of emptiness. The emptiness of the personal self and the emptiness of the self of everything else. You know, so there's the self of the blanket, the self of the room, there's the self of the money in one's pocket, there's the self of the mind, like that. So everything else it appears to have a level of existence that it doesn't really possess, and that's called self-existence or inherent existence or intrinsic reality. It's all of these terms are referring to something that exists in its own right. It appears to your mind through the force of its existence, rather than being something that you've created conceptually in your mind and then project or impute. So it appears as if it's objectively existing. So the best way to start is by working with the self of persons. So the person is you. It's identified in your own mind by the word me or I, and other people identify you by the name that they know you by, like that. And so this is the object that we're going to investigate. And so you have to have a look at how this me or I appears. And it doesn't always appear very clearly, because we use the term I or me all the time. And we use it in ways that we've become accustomed to. So we can refer to the customary truth of the personal identity, the customary reality, or the conventional reality, but I'm going to play around by using this word customary, because I'm always looking for different words that kind of resonate a little more. And so we learn how to speak by our parents and other people teach us the use of language, and then we use the language, and gradually we become masters of the language. But it's all a custom, the customary use of these sounds that we can articulate, and they have associated meanings which we've learned. We've conceptualized these meanings, and then we attach those meanings to oral sounds, and also written not sounds, but written language as well. But language initially is oral, and like that. So it's all customary. And so there is, the customary correct use of language that employs the personal pronouns. So such as, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, I'm listening. And so this is the customary use of the word I. And so I is referred to as a person, and it's one's own personal identity. And it has a customary reality to it, because if you weren't listening, if you weren't sitting there, if you weren't thinking about it, then where would you be? You wouldn't be in the room, for instance, right? So you are there, and you are listening, and you are thinking about what's being said, what you're hearing. So that's all true. So the analysis, though, is not analyzing that level, because that level there's nothing the matter with that level. That's true, that exists. What needs to be analyzed is something deeper, something when this I, this personal identity, appears as this concrete thing that exists in its own right, that is not a mere creation of thought and language, but exists independent of thought and language, that is there in its own right as a concrete entity. And sometimes that appearance becomes more pronounced. At other times, it's there, but it's subtle. You hardly even notice it. That's why we sometimes call it unconscious, the unconscious view, ignorance. But sometimes it appears more strong. Like, for example, if somebody were to call you a liar, or call you a thief, like if you walk out the door of a shop, and the proprietor or a security guard comes up behind you and says, "You thief, you stole something." You hadn't stole anything, but anyway, immediately you have a very strong sense of, I am not a thief. And this sense of self, your personal identity, this concrete way in which it appears, can appear very strongly to your mind. It's a separate entity. And so this is the one that we need to investigate, whether or not this concretely appearing self, personal identity, exists as it appears or does not. Is this a hallucination, or is this valid, true, real? And you see, if you don't recognize the right thing to apply this analysis to, then your analysis will not work to uproot this unconscious ignorance. And you might end up refuting the wrong thing. Like some people refute the customary personal identity, which has a valid customary existence. So there's no I, I'm not here. So, yeah, right. And maybe as they're writing, if they write to you, they write with the small letter I instead of a capital I, which is the normal custom. Things are, they never, if you compliment them because they've done something well, they never accept the compliment. Who are you talking to? They're refuting the wrong level of existence here. So this is why it's very important to identify the object that's being negated in the proof of emptiness. And so you have to be watchful for the opportunity to catch that hallucination of oneself, that concrete sense of self, that where it appears to exist in its own right as an objective entity, independent of designation or imputation by name and thought. So I remember one time Lama Zopa was saying, so, if there, he says, this hallucination of oneself appears very strongly when people are talking badly about you. And so it's good to find those people and stand with them and listen to how they're criticizing you, because then you really feel this terribly strong sense of self right in your heart, like it's made out of iron. And I added to that, like the alien ready to jump out of your chest as a separate being, because sometimes it appears as a separate being. And when you have those appearances, then you can remember those for when you're meditating, or you can meditate right then as they're appearing, depending on if you have the opportunity to do that. If you're driving your car, you shouldn't do that. But when you're driving your car, there's many great opportunities. People cut you off and stuff like that, or if you cut somebody else off and then you realize it and then you're feeling guilty. And then also this sense of this concrete sense of self is appearing very strong. Oh, I did something terrible. I'm terrible. This kind of thing. So that's the first step. And it can take a while to accomplish that first step, but that doesn't stop you from working on the next steps. It's just like, a warrior can sharpen his sword before the battle. So similarly, you can work on the other steps even if you haven't yet got a confident understanding of the actual object to be negated in the proof of emptiness. So then the next step is to make a decision that if this personal self doesn't exist within the body and the mind, or separately on its own, independent of the body and the mind, then it doesn't exist at all. Like that. And the reason why this is thought is because you have to have, your reasoning has a certain scope. And that scope has to be thorough enough to lead to the conclusion that this concrete self doesn't exist. So there can't be some third place where it might be hiding, So it's either got to be somehow within this body-mind complex or outside of the body-mind complex. And there can't be any third possibility. So when we think of ourselves, if somebody asks you, if you are applying to renew your license driver's license, say, and they ask you, how tall are you? And, you provide some measurement. And that's actually the measurement of your body, right? But we're taking that, the height of our body, to be my height, and answering that question. And then if they say, and how old are you? Well, then that's also referring to when your body was born up to now. So that's a characteristic of the age of your body. They're not interested in the age of your mind. Because, our minds can be kind of immature sometimes. And we can act like children. But our body, there's a certain time our body was decided that it was born, recognized in the hospital, on the birth certificate, and everything like that. But we take that characteristic of the body as our own. And my age is, supply that answer. And similarly, everything else, like somebody asks, well, are you a good listener? He says, oh yes, I'm a good listener. Well, that's a characteristic of your auditory consciousness, your mind. So then you as a person are taking a characteristic of your mind as your own, like that. And similarly, every single characteristic that we have of ourselves is a characteristic of our body and mind. So, except for one that I could think of, and that's when we when we refer to our body and our mind as something that's a possession of ours. You see, my body, my mind. So, I don't like the way my body looks today. Things like that. Or, my mind is so slow today. So we're the owner of the body and the mind. So now we're not something. Of course, this identity is relative to the body and the mind, but now we're separate from the body and the mind as the owner of the body and the mind. So sometimes the language describes it in that way. So sometimes it seems like we're somehow identical with the body and the mind, or something inside of the body and the mind, like when somebody says, I thought you didn't want to go. So, I want to go, as if I'm the chest, or something covered by the hand on the chest. So that would be a part, like as if one's a part of the body and the mind, like that. And then when we speak of my body and the mind, then we're something separate from the body and the mind. And so one has to kind of think about, is there any third possibility, or do those two cover it? So with this particular four-step analysis, it's considered that the two possibilities cover wherever the personal identity could be. And so, okay. And there's an analogy that's provided for why this step is existing. And that's if a person, a farmer, say, goes out to the barn to milk his cow. And he opens the door of the barn and he goes to the stall where the cow has been, and the cow's not there. And he says, oh my goodness, where'd the cow go? Well, there's a back door to the barn that opens up into the corral, and he sees that back door is open. He says, oh, the cow must be in the corral. So then he goes out the back door of the barn and he looks around in the corral, and the cow's not there. But he sees that there's a gate to the fence of the corral open, and that leads down a laneway, which is fenced in on both sides. And that laneway leads to two fields. So it's kind of a Y-shaped laneway. And so he says, well, the cow must be in the laneway. And he walks down the laneway, and the cow's not there. And he says, oh, the cow must be in one of the two fields. And he knows that those fields are, they have hedges, thick, tall hedges. So the cow must be in one of those two fields. So he goes in the left field. The cow's not there. He says, the cow's in the other field. So then he goes in the other field, and the cow's not there either. And then he says, I don't have a cow. Oh, yeah, I sold it yesterday. So like that, through this analysis, when we look for the person in one of those two places, if we don't find it, we have to have this realization, it's not there. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, like that. And that conclusion, it doesn't exist, is the emptiness of the personal self. And one meditates on that. The mere absence of what one thought was there is the emptiness of the self-existing object, like that. It's a mere emptiness. It's just a negation, like that. But we deal with negations all the time, like in the example, the negation of having a cow. I don't have a cow. Like that. There's many things we don't have. And also that empty pizza box. The pizza's not there. So we can perceive the absence of things. Like that. So then you do an analysis of the body, and you say, okay, well, am I the body? Well, sometimes it's like that. When I say I'm sitting, and the body is sitting, so I must be the body, because I'm sitting. There's not two sittings going on here. There's not the body sitting and my sitting. What if the body got up and left? Would I still be there sitting? No. And this is the kind of analysis that you do. And it's almost funny, because there's a lot of comedy that's based on the use of language, right? Like the English are famous for it. Monty Python's Flying Circus. It's all about the use of language and the strange meanings that it has. I remember studying philosophy in college, and the teacher was his hero was Wittgenstein. So he was teaching us Wittgenstein's philosophy, which is very similar in a way to Nagarjuna's philosophy, in that Wittgenstein thought of philosophy as therapy. As in his later years, and when he has developed the philosophy that he's famous for, he thought of philosophy as therapy. Therapy to free us from getting entangled in our concepts and our language, like that, and help to simplify our lives and relieve us of these knots of thought that we get ourselves entangled in. And Madhyamika philosophy is just like that. It's considered a therapy. There's even philosophers who have studied it and find it a bit too simple for them, because they like complexity. Especially an academic philosopher, he makes his living by having by his knowledge, and the more complex his knowledge is, the more guarantee he has of his having a job. Somebody else won't take it, right? If what he's teaching is too simple, then the students will say, "Well, everybody knows that," like that. But this is something that is very easy to understand, but that understanding has to has to relate to or point at this this concept that grasps at the concretely existing self. Then it's significant. Then it has value. So one, and one can go looking at the parts of the body. Says, well, the body. I can't be the body because the body is just. It's many things. The body is not just one thing. We refer to it as one body, but that's only the customary use of language. It's actually many things. It has a head, it has 2 arms, it has 2 legs, it has a torso, and then each of those has many parts, all the way down to the atoms, and then the atoms have many parts. And even if one imagines the most subtle part, even that can be conceptually divided into its top, its bottom, its front, its back. So even that is not absolutely one thing. So you go, and that kind of understanding leads you to see this sense of self as being a concept. Because just as the body becomes a concept as a way of organizing all these many things that are interacting in a particular coordinated way, but there's still many things. And then we use the concept of body to refer to all of that as a single thing. But it's just a concept because it's not really a single thing, because it's many things. So, like that. And then also, like sometimes you would take things like parts of your body, and like maybe if you, or me, not you, but me, I could be in the gym and I look in the mirror and I look straight in the mirror and I say, oh, I'm not too bad. And then I turn sideways and I see this beer belly sticking out. I said, I can't stand the way I look, just because of this one part, I have to do something. I have to cut down on the amount of beer I drink. Maybe if I exercise more, I don't have to cut down on the beer. Whatever the reasoning, But still, here's one part of the body that one has identified with, right? And then you have to say, well, is that body me? Is that belly me? If that belly is me, what about when I'm sitting down? Is my belly doing the sitting? Or is something else doing the sitting? Maybe it's what's connected to the chair that's doing the sitting. Is that me? If that's the case, then those people who criticize me are right, because they criticize me as if I'm the part that's touching the chair. Like, whatever. But, we use these words all the time. But when we take them as literally, as really referring to this separate entity that has an objective existence out there, even language falls apart. Because then you would say, well, I can't be sitting in the chair because it's the body that's sitting in the chair and I'm not the body. So where am I? And then with the mind, you go to the mind then after you've explored the body. Go to the mind and says, well, I'm listening. So maybe I'm the mind because the mind is doing the listening. But if I'm the mind, then I can't be sitting because the mind doesn't sit. In a chair anyway. So So then you see this kind of conflict of ideas. And the more you find those conflicts, the more it appears that this I is just a creation of words and thought. Okay? So then one moves outside, says, well, maybe, okay, so then when I'm referring to me as using the characteristics or the actions of the body and the mind, then that's true, it's just something conceptual, but maybe there's some real me that's there but independent of the body and the mind, such as the owner of the body and the mind. So then you imagine, okay, well, if that's the case, let's imagine that the body and the mind get up and go. Where are you? Where are you? By what characteristic can you be understood by? Is there any characteristic that's somehow separate from the body and the mind that you still have? The word me? Okay, but that's a word. That's not you. That's a word. Being the owner of the body and the mind? Well, the owner exists in relation to that which is owned. So it doesn't exist independently. It's not there. It can't be found there either. So if it's not outside the body and the mind, existing independently of the body and mind, if this concrete self-existing thing is not existing as the body or the mind, or within the body of the mind, then it doesn't exist at all. So this, sometimes with the mind, we identify as, like, in our private thoughts, that's where we hang out the most. But interestingly, these thoughts are expressed with a language, right? Once you know a language, you'd use it to think with. And yet, where did the language come from? You weren't born with it. It was something you learned from outside. And it's a means of communicating. So it's for the purpose of communicating to other beings. So even these private thoughts that one has exist by depending upon others. They're formed by a language that came from others for the purpose of communicating with others. And without that language, without those personal pronouns, you wouldn't even be able to identify yourself. And there are meditators who have been working on single point of concentration, and their concentration becomes so strong that they stop thinking of themselves, right? And then the fact that they're not thinking of themselves suddenly shocks them. Like, where did I go? And then it becomes a distraction of their single point of concentration. And there was one time when Lama Tsongkhapa was teaching emptiness, and one of the disciples in the room, one of the students, was understanding this teaching in such a way that he felt like he was disappearing. And Lama Tsongkhapa saw him kind of clutching at himself to hold on to himself, And Lama Tsongkhapa says, oh, it looks like so-and-so is understanding what I'm talking about. So it can be, sometimes it can be a little scary because you're kind of, the way we usually see ourselves as this concrete entity suddenly becomes, just a concept, and then it no longer has that weight, that hardness that we associate with it, of something existing in its own right. And it can be like, like sometimes we can have moments of insecurity, right? Like when we think we're something and then something happens that we have this question of whether we're really that thing or not. You know, like there's, you know, we can say, well, I'm the daughter of so-and-so. And then some question arises, are you sure? Am I adopted? And in that moment, there's some kind of fear, insecurity, anxiety that comes up. And so this can happen when you're meditating on emptiness, and that's a good sign. It means that your meditation is hitting the right target. But eventually you have to get comfortable with that, you know, because otherwise it continues. It then becomes a block, an obstacle for you to extend your understanding further. And there's the way of understanding it, or the way of overcoming that block is just by the recognition that, well, if this thing doesn't exist, then it could not have been responsible for any of the actions that I've done my whole life in the past up till now and going on into the future. The misconception that believes in it is involved in what I've done in the past, just like a person who can have a superstition that say they believe that that if they spill salt, it brings bad luck, and so they got into the habit or the custom of throwing the salt over their shoulder, you know, to overcome the bad luck, and then they realize that just spilling salt doesn't cause bad luck, and maybe they heard that you know that custom came from one time in the past when salt was very expensive, and in order to safeguard the salt, and people were told, oh, don't spill the salt, you know, it's bad luck, or something like that. The real bad luck is that it's very hard to get salt and salt is necessary. Otherwise you get diseases like gouter and so on. So then the person hears that and says, oh, all this time I thought it was bad luck, it's not bad luck. I had no bad luck. There was no reason for me to throw the salt over my shoulder, because I didn't acquire any bad luck. Similarly, this inherently existing person never existed from the beginning. It's always been a hallucination, a fabrication of thought that we have then associated a reality to that it never had, and then without questioning that, just believed in it and followed a pattern of action, just like a person following that superstition. And that has nothing to do with one's actual life. It doesn't have, you know, it's not one's body, it's not one's health, it's not one's mind. So one will still have a body, and one will still have a mind, and one will still be able to use language, and that language will still be able to incorporate personal pronouns, and so on. So one will still be able to communicate with other people, and one will not become some babbling idiot because one has realized emptiness. But, you know, sometimes the fear has that, it makes one think, oh, if I'm disappearing, what will become of me? What will people find when they come to my room to look for me? Like that. They will find the same person, only you might be a bit brighter now, because you won't have this superstition governing all of your actions and interactions with others. So by thinking of that and thinking of people who have spent their whole lives studying this and meditating on this, and are well known as authorities on the subject and masters of the subject, and like the Dalai Lama. He seems to function pretty well. So I guess there won't be a danger if I actually realize emptiness. I'll be able to function pretty well too, like that. So that will help overcome that anxiety, if the anxiety arises. Okay. So, like I said, when you go through this kind of two-pronged analysis of whether it's identical with the body and the mind, or existing independently of the body and the mind, and you don't find it in either place, then you know it doesn't exist. And that's what you meditate on. That's the emptiness. The mere absence of that thing that you assumed was there, and now you know it's not there. So you meditate on that, which is a little hard to do because it's, this has got no shape, no sound, nothing. And sometimes that, and because of that, it's called space-like emptiness. Because space is a mere absence of obstruction to extension, right? So space, like the space between two pieces of furniture, and you can walk between them, right? Or the space between rows of seats, which enables you to move. So that space, it's a mere absence of an obstruction. So, and emptiness is a mere absence of inherent existence. So that's so there are similarities because they're mere absences. And also, if you were to meditate on on space, there would be no particular color or shape that would appear to your mind. And likewise, if you meditate on emptiness, there's no color or shape that appears. So it's called space-like emptiness. And what was his name? I think it was the fifth Dalai Lama once referred to himself as the yogi of space. So that was because he meditated on the space-like emptiness. But when you meditate on that, sometimes the emptiness actually becomes just a space. So you're meditating on space because you've lost your connection with the emptiness. So then you have to go through the analysis again to get to the emptiness. So you're meditating on emptiness and not something else. And the more you do this analysis, the more familiar you become with it, and the less analysis you have to do to bring that understanding back to mind. You can just recall it, just like that, because you become very familiar with it. So that, and then during the break time, when you're not meditating, then you still, you're still thinking about it, and using opportunities when the sense of self gets really strong, like the concrete self says, here it is, opportunity to meditate. Or then engaging in various practices, such as the practice of generosity, thinking about, well, here I am giving something to somebody, but that I that's giving is just a creation of thought, imputed upon this action of the body, imputed upon this gift. The gift is imputed upon this thing, this person who's receiving something that's an imputation upon their body and mind, like that. And so it goes like that. And then you can also meditate on the emptiness of the body and the mind. Like the body is empty of being a real body because it's actually many things, and just the word and concept body is imputed on it. And then you take that down to even the most subtle particles as well. I'm referring to this as a particle, as if it were one thing existing from its own side as this completely homogeneous single entity. But in fact, it has parts. At least it has a top that's different from the bottom. It has a front that's different from the back, like that. Or it has different charges, or it exists as a mere relativity. If I wasn't looking for it, I couldn't find it. There's all these kind of understandings that have been acquired through particle physics. And some of those understandings have been written in languages that people who are not physicists and mathematicians can understand. So you can utilize that to meditate on, the subtle particles of the body. And then going to the mind, well, the mind is a continuum of moments of awareness. But a continuum is just a concept designated on individual moments. And a moment this is an effect. It doesn't exist from its own side, unchanging. It comes from a previous moment. So if it's dependent upon a previous moment, it's an effect of a previous moment, then everything that moment, that effect moment is derived from its causal moment. It doesn't possess anything from its own side. It derived all of its characteristics, all of its qualities, all of its functions from its causal moment. So it doesn't exist in its own right in any way. Another way of looking at it is this moment is made of many parts. It has a moment which is a main mind, main awareness, and then it has various factors. The factor of feeling, the factor of recognition, the factor of attention, so many different factors that it's involved with that make up that moment of awareness. So here too, a moment is something that depends upon the word moment, an understanding of what a moment means, and designating that and imputing that on this changing ball of awareness, like that. And so you can meditate on the emptiness of the mind too, like that. And then you use those understandings, that kind of awareness, and you sharpen that on other objects, like to get a real good understanding of why an effect doesn't have any existence from its own side, because it depends upon causes. And then you look at things like, a moment of a flame of a candle, that moment of a flame is derived from a little bit of wax that's melted and been drawn up the wick, and then through a previous moment of fire gets sparked and becomes the next moment. But it can't last because it was derived entirely from its causes, which are then used up by the effect. Then the effect it doesn't exist from its own side. Of course, we look at the fact and say, well, but it's different from the candle, and it's different from the wick. True it is, but it was derived entirely from the wick, the wax, and the previous moment of flame that ignited that melted wax that was drawn up the wick. So it doesn't have an identity from its own side. But of course, we can imagine things having an identity from its own side, like, cartoonists could take a flame and draw two little eyes and a little nose and a smiling face, put some hands on it and legs, and the flame is dancing. Now we have dancing flames, and then we have this habit of imputing personality to this thing, as if it's a real, oh, I like that, oh, don't take it away. And there we go, because we have these habits, the self-habit. So you can use this analysis in many different occasions. You can use it on the blankets. The blanket is actually individual threads that are sewn together. And so it doesn't exist inherently, because it's actually many things, many threads. And then the word blanket, it's just a sound that now has meaning. In the English language, it has meaning. And we impute this idea on this collection of threads. So, and thus a blanket appears to our mind. Before that, there was just a collection of colored threads. So this kind of analysis you can do at any time. And it's good to do. But when you do it, it's good to know why you're doing it, right? The reason why you're doing it. For the Bodhisattva, the reason why he's doing it is to collect the wisdom that will result in the mind of a Buddha. And also to utilize that wisdom so that one's actions that one is engaged in, like with the body, with the speech, that these all become transcendent through being viewed with this wisdom, and thus they become then causes of the merit that eventually results in the form body of a Buddha. So it's important to remember why we're engaged in these practices, because then that makes it into a spiritual practice. You know, there are those, a scholar could study the subject of emptiness and not benefit much from it at all, except it might make them very arrogant or jealous because somebody else might get more recognition than themselves. So it's not actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. So you have to use it for its purpose, and that. So the motivation is very important. And then one's practice is not just the accumulation of wisdom. One, as I mentioned before, accumulation of merit and purification are very important to prepare one's mind, so that one day this ultimate analysis will really touch you, and one's mind will change, and you will let it change into a view of yourself that you never had before. I think I'm satisfied. I think I've said what I wanted to say. Okay. Any questions? There's no necessity to ask questions.
When you refer to like a meditation on emptiness, like through, like I know I have How to Meditate book that is part of this program. Or is there a specific meditation online on that, a guided meditation on emptiness?
I don't know. The Discovering Buddhism program has a module on emptiness in written form, and they also, I think, they may have had it taped as well. I'm the one who wrote it, and I delivered that at Sichin Ling in San Francisco, and I think they taped it. And as I recall, there may have been one or two meditations. But just what I've described, that 4-point analysis, that's a meditation on emptiness. Just that. Sitting down and thinking, what am I doing? I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, but the body's sitting and the mind is thinking, so what am I? Boom. Just something like that. All right, well, it's been my great pleasure to have this opportunity to teach you. And like I've said in the past, if you found anything that was useful, please don't forget it. Make use of it. And hopefully then you'll derive all the benefit that can be obtained from it. And I look forward to seeing you all again sometime.
Thank you so much, Pende, and just on behalf of all of us and everyone that's not here too, just want to thank you so much for taking the time to lead this course for us, and to please continue to teach, and to please live long and
thank you. I will. All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.